The worst of her fate came in late autumn, towards the end of October, beginning of November. That's why Mirabelle silently hated this cold and gloomy time of year. She found it hard to love the repetitive moments of nature that had happened to her family many years ago in a painful and completely unfair tragedy in the eyes of the little girl. Mirabelle was 5 years old when her parents' car overturned on an icy and slippery road in late November. At night, it was very cold, and in the morning, the ice crust on the road was already glistening. The little girl was at her grandmother Juanita's house. The parents had gone to a relative's house for a birthday party. The couple knew the party would probably last late into the night, so they decided not to torment the little girl and did not take Mirabelle with them. The little girl's memory is imprinted with the ringing of the house phone in the middle of the night. Her grandmother walked over to the phone. Mirabelle heard the click of the receiver and then a sleepy hello from Juanita. Afterwards, there was complete silence in the hallway for a few seconds, and then a thud. Mirabelle immediately jumped out of bed, and when she ran out into the hallway, she was horrified to see her grandmother slumped unconscious on the floor. Doctors at the hospital later said that the girl's father and mother had miraculously survived such a car accident. But both parents had suffered very serious injuries and were in the hospital for a long time before they were able to return home. Mirabelle's mother, Laura, suffered a severe concussion and has since had severe memory problems that have only gotten worse with age. The father, Alberto, was even less fortunate. The man was permanently disabled as he suffered a very serious fracture of the spine. The man could only move around in a wheelchair and always suffered from headaches, for which there was no painkiller. Of course, doctors have suggested that Mirabelle's parents could get them back to a social or somewhat active life if she and her grandmother could get hold of some medication. But they had never seen such large sums of money. So all of Alberto and Laura's healthcare fell on the shoulders of their grandmother and granddaughter. For the next 10 years, until graduation, Mirabelle helped Juanita keep her parents afloat. Of course, going back to their regular jobs was out of the question. Mirabelle's mother worked as a saleswoman almost without weekends, and on her only free evening, she would rush to the nearest car service center in her village, where she worked part-time as a cleaner. As for her father, who was supposed to be the driver of the combine harvester and other large industrial machinery on the farm, he was quickly taken over by a younger, healthier guy, someone from the protege of the same owner of the agricultural complex. Both parents received disability benefits, and the grandmother received a pension. That was all their humble income. From the moment her ill-fated car crashed, Mirabelle's childhood ended abruptly, and a harsh adulthood began in which the main task of the unfortunate little family was to survive the harsh conditions of village life. The grandmother and granddaughter refused almost everything, spending the money they received from the state on medicines for sick relatives. The mother and father were terribly worried that the pain that had come upon them was affecting the future of their beloved daughter. "Oh, Mirabelle, you shouldn't be bothered by us," Alberto often said as he tightened the screws on the wheels of his pram, his hands still more or less mobile. "You should put us in a nursing home and be done with it. You should be with the boys, not playing around with helpless cripples. Dad, how many times have I told you not to call Mom and yourself cripples? Yes, a tragedy has happened, and yes, it is very hard for all of us, but that doesn't change the fact that we are a family. We've looked after each other and will continue to do so as long as I'm strong enough." "That's right," Dad said, waving the screwdriver. "That's a good point. How far can I go? Now you ruin your younger years and then you'll blame us for everything. You think you can get by on your own, but life is too long. Go see what tomorrow is going to be like. Before you know it, you'll be a broken old maid with no one to talk to." But Mirabelle was not one to give up. She did everything she could to earn a penny more for her family. As a high school student, she visited homes in the area and offered services as a babysitter and tutor, helping first-year students in Spanish and math. As she grew older, Mirabelle took her mother's place as a part-time car mechanic. The money from cleaning services helped the family make ends meet, and there was also a farm and a vegetable garden. Mirabel was a squirrel in a wheel, trying to combine housework, school, and night jobs in one day. When Mirabel was 16, her grandmother, Juanita, suddenly became ill. At a doctor's appointment, she was diagnosed with a distressing brain disease that could not be cured with medication. Only an operation could help, but it cost a lot of money, and the waiting list for free care threatened to stretch on for years. "Well, granddaughter, what will be, will be," Juanita sighed sadly. "It seems fate has it in store for me to go to your wedding." "What are you talking about, Grandma?" "What wedding?" Mirabel said indignantly. "We have to get you back before we do anything else. And who needs a girlfriend like you?" The girl's kind face lit up with a sad smile. "Oh, Mirabel, I didn't think I'd have to leave this world so soon. I thought I'd live to help you and your mother and your father. I don't want to imagine how you'll be here without me." "Don't be silly," her granddaughter scolded her. "I have to try to get in line for an operation, and then I'll go to the capital and try to get an appointment with the chief surgeon. Maybe I can speed up the case. I'll tell her our situation. Maybe everything will be solved somehow." Juanita just stroked Mirabel's head lovingly. "God, you look like your mother." Tears began to shine in the old woman's eyes. She was just as stubborn, and now she doesn't even remember her own name. "You're good, Mirabel. I only ask God that when I start to recover, everything in your life will be different and happy." The girl wiped away the old woman's tears and answered, trying to put it down to a joke. "Come on, Grandma, as if you didn't know that I have bad luck in life." At that moment, her heart felt as if a stone shell had grown over it, and she felt very, very uneasy. Her intuition was right. Her trip to the city ended badly for her. Mirabel was able to meet with the surgeon, but that was all. After carefully studying Juanita's medical history and the photos Mirabel took, the surgeon dispelled the girl's last illusions, stating that such operations are booked months, if not years in advance. Even very rich people sometimes have to wait a long time, not to mention ordinary citizens. "Forgive me," the surgeon said with his hands parted. "All I can do for you in this difficult situation is to sincerely sympathize. Try to spend more time with your grandmother. This may be her last year." It was October. Mirabel realized that another dark hour would soon come in her life. And so it did. In early December, when the first layer of light snow covered the ground, the grandmother left. The whole village buried her. She had spent the best years of her life teaching chemistry and biology to the children at the village school. She had been the teacher of almost all the adults left in the village. So when they heard what had happened, they immediately gathered what they could and helped the young girl accompany her beloved teacher on her journey with dignity. The family was left with only the three of them: the mother, the father, and Mirabel herself, as part of Juanita's pension money had disappeared with her grandmother's death. Alberto, who by then felt he had more power in his hands, decided to help his daughter, who was torn between study and work, making small wooden souvenirs that she later took to the small market in the town or sold at the passing train station. Her father tried to give every cent of the money he received from such humble work to Mirabel. "Here, daughter, at least buy yourself a new dress for the graduation. It will be a shame if our daughter comes to the party in an old sweater and a skirt," Dad convinced Mirabel. "Don't do it, Dad. Put the money in the piggy bank." "We'll find a better use for it," she replied. "And I'm not going to the party. What am I going to do there?" "Mirabel, why do you say that?" Laura, with a deep sadness in her voice, intervened in the conversation. "A day like this only happens once in a lifetime." The poor woman felt terribly guilty towards her daughter because of her illness, she couldn't find even the simplest part-time job. Her memory failed her at the most inopportune moment, and then Laura couldn't remember even the most basic things, like how to hold the doorknob or how to open the door. Mirabel wasn't even sure that it was such an important day, as she thought that was the only reason for spending such a large amount of money. Despite all the difficulties, Mirabel managed to finish school with good results. After graduation, Mirabel planned to start looking for a job right away, as she didn't have the energy to continue studying and hadn't managed to save enough to pay a decent university tuition. Realizing that she no longer needed it, she tried to do everything she could to provide her family with a minimal income. However, finding a stable job in the village proved difficult. Most of the people needed here were people with technical knowledge or professional farming skills. The only livestock the family had were poultry. Chickens and geese were at most the livestock knowledge Mirabel could boast of. Mirabel, on the other hand, would have liked to work as a teacher, but she did not have the necessary training for such a position. Fortunately, at that time, one of the older teachers who knew Juanita well was preparing to become a grandmother for the third time. Her daughter, who worked in the library, was preparing for a long maternity leave again. So she offered the vacant position to a recent graduate. Needless to say, Mirabel accepted without hesitation. The new workplace quickly attracted the girl. The place was quiet, and she didn't have to do many tasks. The most difficult ones were watering the flowers and wet cleaning the small reading room. Mirabel was quick and not lazy, so she could easily learn the basics of librarianship. Nothing else was required of her. It was in the library that she first saw Antonio, not too tall, but with a good build and thick, dark brown curly hair. He quickly won the young librarian's heart. Antonio wandered through the shelves, not quite sure which book to choose. Mirabel arrived just in time to help him. "Are you looking for something in particular?" she asked pleasantly. "Which author? Any particular genre?" She blushed, not knowing what the best answer was. Finally, she said hesitantly, "You know, I don't really choose it for myself. My aunt broke her leg in the hospital. She asked me to bring something to read, preferably a romance novel, and I don't really know much about romance novels." Mirabel smiled a little slyly, involuntarily shaking her lush, wheat-red hair. "Then I suggest you pick up Jackie Collins. Your aunt will love it, it's a classic," he said, taking the right book from the shelf. Antonio thanked Mirabel, and they met. Afterwards, he often went to visit her at her workplace to pick up books for his mother and godmother. They both knew by then that they had mutual feelings, but they continued to behave as if there was nothing between them but a purely professional relationship between reader and librarian. A month later, Antonio dared to ask Mirabel out on their first date, after which they officially became a couple. However, the young couple did not spend as much time together as expected. Antonio had to serve in the army and was away for 2 years. Mirabel promised him that she would wait for him, and she honestly kept her promise. Time flew by. But when Antonio returned from the army, Mirabel got a very unpleasant surprise. He suddenly stopped answering the phone when she tried to call him. Mirabel did not understand what was happening, because while her beloved was in the army, she tried to keep in touch in every possible way, sending him touching letters, photos, and all kinds of things that she could buy with her modest librarian salary. In one of her last letters, shortly before her demobilization, they agreed to marry as soon as she got home. The girl began to worry that something bad had happened to her fiancé. Trying to find out the truth, Mirabel went to the house of Antonio's aunt Ramona and forcibly demanded that he finally tell her what had happened to her beloved. Ramona, being a mature woman, was well aware of what had happened. However, she was still a little afraid to tell the girl, who would not let herself be dominated by her difficult fate. She had seen the couple in her house more than once while raising Antonio alone, and she liked Mirabel purely on human terms. However, it was impossible to dominate the heart of the young fiancé. Today he loves one, and tomorrow he dies. He can't live without the other. "That's what happens, Mirabel," she began softly. "You, I know, are a reasonable girl, so you'll understand everything, and I'm sure you'll be able to forgive Antonio. Not suddenly with time, but I think you can. Mirabelle was immediately on the alert. A bad feeling pricked her chest like a small, sharp needle. Her mouth went dry in an instant. "Ramona, what happened? Where's Antonio?" she asked the woman. She cleverly pushed her gold-rimmed glasses up on the bridge of her nose. "You see, Mirabelle, that happens in life. Well, Antonio has chosen another girlfriend. I'm sorry." The girl barely had time to grab onto the back of the chair in the small kitchen when she heard the news. Her insides were definitely shattered. "What other?" Mirabelle said, struggling to find words. "When? How?" "It's been 3 months, to be honest. I wasn't too happy that Antonio hadn't written to you about it either. You could have warned me. At least I wouldn't have expected it. You should have seen other guys. Look around you. And what is it like? Antonio and I wanted to live together until our old age. We were planning a vacation, as if we were going on a trip." Mirabelle fell into a deep unconsciousness, repeating the same phrases over and over again. Ramona was frightened. Perhaps the girl had gone mad and rushed to pour her a glass of cold water. "Don't blame yourself, girl. She didn't do it out of spite. He saw Catalina last spring and fell madly in love." "Catalina?" Mirabelle asked, taking a sip from the glass. "Is she the mayor's daughter?" "Yes," she answered quietly. "He told me later that he couldn't decide between you two, that he wanted you both." Mirabelle couldn't believe it. Her fiancé was seeing 2 women at the same time. Catalina was a proven beauty and the daughter of a mayor. And evidently the desire to get a rich girlfriend instead of a hapless one overcame all feelings for her in Antonio. "Ramona, where is Antonio now?" Mirabelle asked in a voice that was not her own. A slight shadow passed over the face of the woman standing next to her. "You don't need to know, Mirabelle." But still, the girl pressed on. "His wedding is today with Catalina." Mirabelle didn't remember exactly how she had gotten home. It didn't matter now. Her most precious possession had been taken away from her. What else could the girl oppose to this harsh outside world and her own heart? After what had happened, Mirabelle had become especially indifferent to everything, as if she had lost the most important part of herself, the one responsible for the will to live and to look to the future with optimism. She then saw Antonio and Catalina several more times before they moved to another city. Antonio preferred not to look into his ex-girlfriend's eyes, but he still blushed charmingly from embarrassment, just like the first day they met. But now it did not provoke in Mirabelle the former outbursts of tenderness. The young librarian's heart seemed to have completely emptied itself. There was nothing left in it but the care of her parents and the daily duty of going to work. However, now work also evoked more and more negative feelings in Mirabelle. Almost everything here reminded her of the happy days she had spent with Antonio, the happy days of falsehood. When after meeting her, he ran away to his second girlfriend, much richer and much more beautiful. The result of the mental torment was Mirabelle's decision to leave her hometown, and at the same time suddenly hated. In fact, it was Mirabelle's best friends, Luisa and Letizia, who took the initiative. The girls had been planning to move to the city for a long time, but now they had enough money to do so. Seeing how their best friend was suffering, her classmates suggested that she go with them. "Come on, Mirabelle," Letizia insisted. "What's keeping you here?" "Except your parents, and everything will be new. Maybe you'll find happiness there." "Yes, happiness," the more rational Luisa intervened. "It would be good to find a job first, and then a place to live, preferably not in the suburbs." "Well, Letizia is right in general. You should go, relax a little, try to start from scratch. Trite, but true." Mirabelle shook her head uncertainly. The 3 of them sat in Letizia's kitchen, drinking instant coffee from large ceramic cups. "Oh, girls, that's what scares me. Who's going to look after Mum and Dad? They'll be lost without me." "What about their neighbors?" Luisa asked nonchalantly. "Tell him everything. Explain the situation to them. I think they'll understand and help you." "They're strangers, Luisa," Mirabelle said uneasily. and if something happens, they might not know what to do. Write the instructions down on a piece of paper for him. I've seen it done in the movies, said the childish Letizia, always quick to offer a solution. Good idea, Louisa said cheekily and laughed. Her tinkling laughter infected everyone, even Mirabelle. For a moment, she thought that was it, that all problems could be solved if only a little logic was applied and one was not afraid to ask someone she knew for help, at least the most basic. However, the light mood did not last long. Once at home, the girl again felt the weight of everyday problems. Her father, seeing his daughter's gloomy mood, ventured to ask what the reason was. He knew that Mirabelle was still suffering from her husband's betrayal, and that was why he wanted to ease her anguish. At first, she did not want to talk about her desire to leave, but then she gave in. After listening to her, Alberto, to his daughter's surprise, only felt relieved. It turns out that he had wanted Mirabelle to finally start living her own life outside the home for a long time. Of course, daughter, go, the father said happily, and took the girl's hands. We are just glad to be with your mother. Don't worry about us. Benito lives nearby. He's always there to get firewood. And Francesca from the third house is a nurse. She will take care of your mother. We are not the only ones who live in the country. There are good people to help. Tears of gratitude shone in the daughter's eyes. Thank you, Dad, she whispered, kissing her father tenderly on the stiff cheek of his old beard. I promise I will take you to my house as soon as I get settled there. Stop it. She patted her daughter on the back. Stop crying, or you will see what a mess you have made. Alberto smiled sincerely, and Mirabelle felt the icy crust on her soul crack slightly, and a warm, caressing wave of hope immediately enter her heart. A few days later, after gathering her remaining savings and reluctantly taking the part of money her father had managed to secretly set aside, Mirabelle and her friends set off in search of their place in the capital. The huge, bustling metropolis really surprised the girl. Unlike her humble, sleepy village, here literally every corner was bustling with life. Shop windows lit up with alluring lights, awakening in Mirabelle a vague desire for youth that she had long since forbidden herself. Beautiful things attracted the eye, promising a sweet life. Of course, Mirabelle understood that it was all an illusion, a beautiful dream for provincial moths, and those who had not yet had the opportunity to be enchanted by all the pleasures of metropolitan life. After the countryside, where the only landscape was a river, and the local cultural center, the click of the huge city was felt with incredible intensity. The girls managed to rent a room for the three of them, not far from the subway, and then actively looked for a job. Here was the first unpleasant surprise. Almost all more or less decent places asked for a detailed resume with work experience and positive references from a previous employer. Of course, none of them could boast of this. Letizia worked for a few months as a milkmaid on a farm, and Luisa tried to train as an accountant at the same car service center where Mirabelle had worked part-time. Overall, the girls' experience was not very good. Mirabelle, on the other hand, was only offered 2 job opportunities at any given time, either working as a cleaner in shops and shopping centers, as she did in the village, or going behind the counter as a shop assistant. She knew from her mother's experience that both jobs would be of no use to her. In both cases, she would only end up with health problems and ultimately lose the opportunity to find her own way in life. She tried to get a job in the large libraries in the city, of which there were many, but unfortunately, unlike in the countryside, they require special education and impeccable appearance, something that Mirabelle, who had arrived in the capital in an old sweater and trousers that were already overcooked for the 3rd time, certainly could not boast of. In every place, she was shown the door, sometimes kindly, sometimes not so kindly. Desperate to find a normal job, the friends pooled their money and paid a specialist from a recruitment agency to find them something with a salary level close to the reality of life in the capital. Fortunately, the results were not long in coming. A couple of days later, the girls were invited to a job interview where they were each offered a suitable position. Mirabelle got a job as a housemaid in a luxurious mansion in the countryside, with room and board included. Mirabelle was told that candidates for the position were judged very strictly and that if she failed her probationary period, she was likely to get a job in the metropolis. Mirabelle had faith in her abilities and decided that if she could combine her old job as a librarian and gardener by looking after the plants in the library, she could also do the maid job. She agreed and got all the information she needed and waited for them to call her. The agency assured her that they would get back to her in a few days at the most. What if they don't call? She shared her doubts with her friends. I can't even imagine how I'm going to get back to our village. My father is probably already picturing me as a successful businesswoman. They will, you'll see, Louisa assured her, adjusting her own uniform. The girl had already been contacted and was now starting her first day as an administrator at a beauty salon. It was a small company, but the pay promised to be good. Letizia was also lucky enough to be offered a position as an administrator at a health club. She was told to pack her things and wait for the company car to pick her up the next morning to take her to the mansion. Mirabelle was quite nervous. A trip to the country and the prospect of living in a luxurious house delighted her and slightly frightened her at the same time. What would happen if she didn't make the bed properly or didn't bring breakfast to her hosts? All these questions tormented Mirabelle, so much so that she couldn't sleep the night before the trip. Her instinct told her that she would soon have a completely new life. But what kind of life? This question remained unanswered in the voice of the former librarian. Early in the morning, a large black business car with tinted windows drove up to the entrance of the house where the three friends lived. Mirabelle was already waiting downstairs, having collected her modest belongings. After bidding her friends farewell with a hug, she climbed into the car. The cabin impressed her with its cleanliness, the softness of the leather upholstery on the seats, and the pleasant aroma. The occasional taxis that ran from the train station to the village always smelled of fish and tobacco, and the seats were often stained with oil and traces of strong liquor. The scenery outside the window was incredibly beautiful. The road gradually moved away from the city limits, followed first by neatly planted ornamental trees and then by luxurious country houses. The cottages were postcards of the carefree pastoral life that Mirabelle had only read about in books, and mostly from foreign authors. After passing a checkpoint with a striped barrier, the car entered a gated country complex, impossible to reach from the street. Mirabelle felt as if she had found herself in another world. Everywhere she could see beautiful, huge houses that looked more like castles. She did not know that she would soon be working in one of them. Finally, the car stopped in front of one of the gates. When Mirabelle got out, she immediately felt the unpleasant glances of 2 or 3 cameras closely following the movements of the girl and the driver. "Well, here we are," the man reported fairly. "Wait here for a moment. I will report you to the owners." The man rang the video intercom installed in a special alcove near the door, and after a few seconds he disappeared through the slowly sliding steel doors. The luxurious house with its swimming pool, green golf course and impressive rose garden in the shape of a labyrinth belonged to the Garcia family. The Oberlin family was a powerful businessman who was accompanied on all his trips and business meetings by his wife Ophelia, who was the financial director of the company. The Garcia company specialized in the international transport of millet and other cereals, which is why they were popularly nicknamed the Kings of Bread. The couple also owned several dozen bakeries spread not only in the capital, but also throughout the country. Each region had 1 or 2 branches of the company, so the business ran precisely like a Swiss watch. Together with his parents, their adult son Diego lived in a luxurious mansion. On the outside, the boy was very handsome, but his character was abominable. The spoiled and often hysterical 25-year-old led a life of debauchery and forbidden pleasures. His parents' money had spoiled him since childhood, turning him into a complete egomaniac. So anyone in Diego's sight, the rich boy perceived it as a thing. For a humanoid thing, as he liked to say, he had to pay several times more. Expensive alcohol, wild pool parties, and illegal drug use in the company of beautiful, easily virtued girls. These were the interests of young Garcia. Business partners, of course, did not encourage their son's hobby, but for the most part, they turned a blind eye. Parents believed that all children of well-off people had to go through such a vicious circle when they were young in order to take advantage of all the opportunities offered to them. Afterwards, their children usually calm down and move on without any problems to real study and serious management of the family business. Fortunately, during Mirabel's early years, the boy hardly showed himself. Either she slept through the night after the rowdy parties, or she spent all day at her friends' houses, visiting the friends of equally wealthy sons. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that Garcia Jr. became aware of the new maid's presence in the house. "I hope you've been informed of your parole." Pepita, the Garcia estate's formidable part-time housekeeper, cast a hawk-like eye at the young girl. The tall, slender woman was no stranger to seeing pretty adventurers disguised as maids sneak into the master's bedroom, or worse, the young man's. In her years of managing the estate, Pepita had learned to spot such birds from a distance and to get rid of them in time. And this latest attempt would again be successful. If the young provincial girl, still fresh from the cattle yard in her village, decided that she could put up with the landowner's son, and even, damn the horror, marry her, the housekeeper would notice in time and throw the unfortunate woman out, giving her a wolf's bill at the same time. Now Mirabel would not be allowed to work in any respectable establishment, so she would have to choose between returning home or staying in the city to work in a brothel. What Pepita needed from Mirabel, the new apprentice maid, was for her to carry out her tasks with due diligence and attention. She really needed a good, hard-working girl who could be relied on in all circumstances, whether it was a reception at Orbeline's house or a traditional family dinner in a small circle of close friends and relatives. The maid in her house had to be a shadow, but also fulfill many different functions. The slightest deviation from the course set by the housekeeper could cost the girl as much as the headmistress herself. Remember, Mirabel, it is up to you and your conduct to fulfill the contract entrusted to you and leave this house for a new life with brilliant references and career prospects. Pepita looked at the girl again. Or that you will never be able to find work anywhere in this particular city. Is that clear? I see, Mirabel replied quietly, looking at the floor. I have come to fulfill my contract and I don't want any trouble. I just want to work here, Madam Director. She just smiled crookedly in response. Good answer. Well done. Now let's see what you are capable of. Flattery is something I suppose everyone can do. Mirabel spent the next week learning how to make the beds properly, how to carry 2 trays of food and drink on her arm at the same time, how to clean the rooms of the mansion consistently, maintaining the order that had been established for years. And most importantly, she was learning how to go unnoticed. The servants' awakening in the Garcia house began at 5 a.m. sharp. It was an hour later than Mirabel was used to getting up at home to feed and take the birds out to pasture. A small meeting was held afterwards, at which it was essential that all the workers in the house were present. At this point, everyone received their individual work plan for the day. After this, the staff had exactly 15 minutes to have breakfast before starting their workday. None of the men and women, 10 in total, including the girl herself, thought of trying to slack off or even shirk their duties. In fact, it was unlikely that they would succeed because the mansion was literally packed with video cameras, both external and hidden. Therefore, it was simply impossible to shirk duties here. Mirabel was quick to prove to all the inhabitants of the house that she had not been hired in vain. The girl worked neatly and diligently, and was the last to leave the evening summary meeting where Pepita discussed the results of each employee's work during the day. The manageress was pleased with the new waitress's modesty and good work. In her memory, Mirabel was one of those few girls born and raised in the provinces who came to the big city and to this particular house not to seek easy profits by flirting with the bosses. Pepita has never praised the staff, believing that praise only relaxes the staff and makes them lazy. In this case, however, the woman was so pleasantly surprised by Mirabel's behavior that she could not refrain from a dry but benevolent warning. You can achieve a lot in this life, Mirabel. Believe me, I am a woman who has seen a lot in these years of work and life in this house. You are the rare exception to the sad rule. Thank you, she replied, still looking at the floor. I am very honored to hear you say that for real. Mirabel was no doubt a little frightened by the austere, thin woman who served as manager here. She had given her instructions beforehand on how to behave with Pepita so as not to get into trouble. Of course, he was surprised to hear such flattering praise for his work. However, the new maid still had the feeling that this was all part of a big test and that she had to be on guard at all times and not give in to her own emotions. The first time it happened was a month after Mirabel had settled into Garcia's house as a maid. It was then that he first felt that slippery, sticky look about her that made him want to shower immediately. One day, leaving his room late at night and waking up from yet another hangover, Diego Garcia happened to bump into the new assistant in the hallway. The rich man immediately noticed that the girl was very attractive, even by the standards of the local servants. He especially liked Mirabel's natural reddish gold hair. It was very different from the variety of overheated blondes and brunettes that the rich young man was used to seeing around him. Immediately deciding to find out what was going on, Diego skillfully surprised the maid as she made her way to the storeroom. And taking the vacuum cleaner from her hands, he began an unexpected introduction with the following sentence. "Wow! My father didn't tell me that we had hired such a lovely nymphette." Mirabel only perceived the strong smell of overdose emanating from the bread air at that moment. "Good evening. My name is Mirabel. I am your new maid," the girl answered as the manager had taught her. "I was hired a month ago. You and I have met before. You just haven't paid attention." A deep wrinkle crossed Garcia Jr.'s forehead. It was clear that he was trying to remember the girl, but he had no luck. "It's okay," Mirabel thought with relief. "If she doesn't remember me, it's because I'm doing my job well." "It doesn't matter," the boy murmured at the end. "Who are you, Mirabel? And why is a girl with such a pretty name forced to clean late at night instead of going to her room to rest?" Diego looked at the maid with surprisingly beautiful, but also surprisingly empty gray eyes. It seemed as if his entire soul had long since left behind only ashes. For a second, Garcia reminded Mirabel of the famous Dorian Gray, or rather of what this literary character might look like in real life, having transferred all his black vileness to the canvas of his own portrait. "I'm here because cleaning is my job," the girl replied politely but slightly distantly. "If you'll excuse me, I'll take the vacuum cleaners to the back room. There will be a meeting for the servants soon." Garcia Jr. slowly licked his lips as he looked the girl up and down. "Go away, nymph, or the old crow will crow that I've kidnapped his helpers again. But I'll see you again, for sure, Mirabel." The poor maid felt a lump of vilice rise in her throat. Not only was the rich young man so rude to Pepita, but he also said her name in such a way that the girl wanted to wash her hands of it immediately anyway. Unfortunately, this encounter with the rich heir was not Mirabel's last. Ever since the bread prince saw Mirabel and spoke to her, his thoughts have constantly revolved around the pretty and seemingly innocent maid. "I wonder if she really tastes as fresh as she looks." The boy dreamed with disgust as he lay in front of the huge television in his room. The wide, multicolored screen was broadcasting an explicit cable channel. Diego slowly ran his index finger along his knee, imagining that he was doing it with his new maid. From that moment on, the rich man began to confront Mirabel all the time, hinting that he could get much more money if he satisfied his special whims. However, the girl was disgusted by the idea that the man dared to touch her, much less have a relationship with him. Of course, Mirabel was aware that what he wanted with her was not love and sincere feelings, but something much more banal and at the same time terrifying. "Why are you pushing me away? Calm down." Once again, squeezing the girl under the stairs, the rich man whispered passionately in her ear, "Haven't you had anyone before me?" Mirabel's pale face told her she had hit the mark. Garcia Jr.'s face stretched into a lascivious smile, and he again enveloped the maiden with his sticky, cobwebbed gaze. "Don't be afraid. You are soft, very soft with you." Diego tried to caress her thigh. Mirabel tried to scream, but the boy only squeezed her thin hand to the point of pain. "Don't even try to scream, understand? Or you'll be out of this house like a champagne cork." Suddenly, a tall, gaunt figure made a shadow in the doorway. It was Pepita. "Diego, forgive me for interrupting you. There's an urgent call for you." "Something about cyber gambling," the headmistress announced in an icy tone. The rich man reluctantly backed away from Mirabel. The unfortunate girl stood there motionless. The boy silently slid past Pepita as if she were a huge live snake. The headmistress looked attentively at Mirabel. She could see that this time it had not been the maid herself who had taken the initiative, and she wanted to sincerely sympathize with the girl, especially because of the quality of her life, because there were already real legends about the love affairs of the landlady's son in this town. But with all her sympathy for Mirabel, she could not allow the unseemly rumors of Garcia Jr.'s relationship with another maid to circulate around the house again. As sorry as she was for her best employee, it was up to her to solve the problem caused by the rich man. "Settle your personal affairs with Diego as soon as possible," the director advised her in an indifferent voice. "The house must not find out what is happening, even though I am absolutely sure it is not your fault." The girl only nodded. She trembled like a leaf in the autumn breeze. "Very well, Pepita. I will try to deal with it in the near future." The maid herself thought at that moment that she had forgotten to mark her unlucky time of the year on the calendar. It was right next to the window at the end of November. For a few days, the landlady's son left the girl alone. Mirabel began to harbor the faint hope that Diego had had time to become interested in someone else by this time. However, it was all in vain. The rich man's only intention was to get what he wanted, and he was not going to give in. He only wanted to lull the maid's vigilance so that he could cleverly carry out his deceitful plan. The right opportunity presented itself a few days later, and he left for the maid's house when her parents flew out again to close a lucrative deal with foreign investors. Late at night, the boy burst in at the girl's bedroom door and began to bang actively. "Mirabel! Hey, wake up! Who am I talking to? Did you forget to turn off the faucet in the back room when you were going to get the water? Have you seen what you've done in there? It's a real flood." When she woke up, the girl didn't know what was going on. She had actually washed the kitchen this afternoon after all the workers had left, but she couldn't remember whether or not she had turned off the faucet. So Mirabel jumped out of bed in her nightgown and ran after Diego, wondering if she could get some dry rags, and if the ones in the back room were soaked. That was what the scoundrel was counting on. When the girl entered the back room at a brisk pace, she didn't immediately realize what was going on. It was dry, with only a weak flicker from the single lit light bulb, creating a slight glowing haze everywhere. Behind her, she suddenly heard the sharp click and a turn of the key in the keyhole. It was Diego closing the door to the back room and now staring at her with wide eyes filled with desire. Garcia Jr. began to move slowly towards the girl. "Diego, what are you doing?" Mirabel said in a voice torn with fear. You'll regret it later." "Regret it? Why should I?" He smiled. "On the contrary, nymph. You and I are going to have so much fun that our dance will make the whole house shake." "No, please!" the poor girl screamed, struggling against the rich man. However, the rich bastard acted confidently and methodically, not listening to Clemencia's tears and pleas. Tearing Mirabel's shirt, he began to act like a predator who had finally gotten his coveted prey. When it was all over, Mirabel only wanted one thing: to die here and now. A shame, a pain, and a humiliation that she had never experienced in her entire life. She was even afraid to look up at her tormentor. What if he wanted more? The girl began to frantically look around for some sharp object, and if she tried to do it again, she would rather stab herself in the heart with a knife or a screwdriver immediately, just so she wouldn't feel it on her skin again. "Relax, I won't touch you again," Diego said in a lazy voice, adjusting his wide leather belt. "And you're fine, you taste like popcorn." The rascal walked up to Mirabel and squeezed her chin hard. "Do you know, nymph, what popcorn's speciality is? The speciality is that popcorn tastes good while you're eating it, but when it's gone, you don't even think about it anymore. Get your filthy hands off me." Mirabel resisted the pressure. "You're a scumbag, a poacher. Do you hear me?" Garcia Jr. just smiled. "You're not thinking of telling my parents what happened, are you? You're not the first maid I've spent my free time with. My father and mother are used to naive country girls like you trying to get money out of me all the time. Seriously, you've surprised me this time. Are you that innocent? Normally the girls come here much more prepared and sophisticated, and you don't have to beg them. You have no heart." Mirabel snapped in his face. "I don't need it," Diego replied coldly. "A gold credit card and a well-filled wallet are enough for me. Any woman in your position would be jumping if she paid attention to him, brat." The girl, wrapped in the remains of her nightgown, continued to burn the man with a fierce look. "Remember, you little twat, if you keep your mouth shut, you can keep working here. And if you don't, your parents will hear my version of events in which you are an impudent seductress from a remote village, willing to jump into a rich boyfriend's bunk without a second thought. But you will never get it. You will be under the fence. But you will not find work in the capital. Do you understand me?" Those were the last words the rich man said, almost bursting into a scream. Mirabel nodded silently. She was terrified and could not think clearly. "Well, well," said the rich brat, smiling. "Now everyone go back to their rooms. We do not need to wake people up, do we?" The rape had irreparably changed Mirabel, and while before the girl had limited herself to being polite to the rest of the staff, trying to remain discreet with everyone, now she simply withdrew. She preferred to spend her rare moments in peace in her previously locked room. At night, she was tormented by vague, disturbing dreams. In them, she saw her dead grandmother, her parents crying all the time, or Diego's laughing face twisted by the terrible fire in the empty sockets of his grey eyes. The last nightmare was the worst. The young servant did not want to tell anyone what had happened to her, neither her rapist's parents nor her own. There was no point in complaining to Garcia about her bastard son. Surely they already knew what their future heir was doing. Mirabel was willing to bet anything that she was not his first victim. However, everyone connected in one way or another with the house of this cursed family had to keep silent. The price they were all forced to pay otherwise was too high. The days dragged on, one after another, grey and monotonous. Mirabel continued to work as a maid, tidying the master's rooms and serving Garcia at meals. And the resentment slowly began to heal. Like an open wound in her heart, the pain of her broken honor slowly began to subside. She had to work hard every day, not to break under the weight of her feelings. Only the thoughts of her beloved family, left behind in the village, kept her awake. The girl now had the opportunity to send them small sums of money regularly, which she was sure were an important help in her humble existence. After a while, the girl realized with horror that she was pregnant. With great difficulty, she managed to beg Pepita to take the day off. Mirabel immediately went to the hospital, where the doctor confirmed her worst fears. "Congratulations, Mom. You are 8 weeks pregnant," announced the smiling woman in the white coat. "I can see how happy Dad will be." Then the doctor looked at Mirabel's ring finger, which was not wearing a ring. He asked the woman with a bit of contempt. "No," Mirabel replied coldly. "Well," the doctor sighed, "let's hope he tells her when he finds out." The young maid said nothing about it. Mirabel decided not to delay in telling Diego that she was pregnant. Whatever it was, he was the father of her unborn child. After catching up with the rich guy outside the pool room, Mirabel herself grabbed the guy by the sleeve of his shirt and, overcoming her intuitive disgust, dragged him into the living room for a serious talk. "Boy, we're so hot," she joked immediately. "I thought you didn't want to see me, but it turns out you're a smart girl." The boy tried to stroke Mirabel's face, but she abruptly pushed his palm away. "Don't flatter yourself," she whispered through her teeth. "I have something for you. If it weren't for that, I would." The girl glared at her rapist with hatred. Well, what do you want to talk about?" the rich man sneered. "Wait, let me guess. You wanted my money after all, didn't you?" He laughed shamelessly, and at that moment Mirabel uttered, "I'm pregnant, you clown." The laughter stopped abruptly. For a minute the boy stared at her as if he had suddenly been struck by lightning. He could barely understand what his maid was saying, and when he reached him, the floor made a wide circle under his feet. "What do you mean by pregnant?" she said in an incomprehensible voice and asked again. "Well, yes." "For your efforts," Mirabel joked insultingly. "You are the father. I have not been with other men." The stunned Garcia slowly sat down in the large, upholstered armchair there. A wave of panic instantly invaded him, for if his father found out... "So wait, you can get rid of him, right? I will give you the money, don't worry. Neither you nor I need this child." Mirabel narrowed her beautiful eyes. "What makes you think I don't want him? You are the one who is throwing away people's lives like cards in a poker game. It's not the boy's fault that his father is a monster." Mirabel did her best to pretend that Diego's presence didn't bother her, when in fact her heart clenched in horror every time he shifted gently in his chair like a boa constrictor eyeing a rabbit it had once eaten. Keeping her cool, the girl tried to keep herself safe. With kindness and affection, she had already tried to stop the scoundrel, but then she had failed. Now she tried to act according to her own methods in the hope that this would help her secure some kind of future for the boy. Besides, if word got out in the village that she had gotten rid of the child, the rumors would spread anyway. Mirabel would be branded a child killer once and for all. The village she grew up in has always been known for its traditional, even slightly conservative views. "I'll tell you what. Give me some time to think about it," Diego asked her. "I need to think about it, and then we'll definitely decide something." Mirabel, seeing that Diego didn't drastically reject her, softened a little. Although she was a little worried, the maid still agreed to wait a couple of days. After all, she might as well not give him the child. Clearly, for a rich man, it was an unfortunate accident. All the girl wanted was to get out of the mansion safely before her belly became too noticeable, and she would manage somehow. She would eventually return home to her parents. Garcia Jr. sat alone in his room and thought, well, the girl is pregnant after all, it's a shame, but it happens, everything is okay. But Mirabel flatly rejected his proposal, and thus it became a big problem for him and his famous family. He clearly had no plans to marry her. However, he did not want to keep a brat until he came of age either. He had to prove that the child was not his. The general situation surrounding Garcia also added fuel to the fire. Orbelin intended to stand for parliamentary elections this spring, and the scandal of the maid's pregnancy would certainly have damaged his political standing. It was not the right time. Diego paced from one corner to another, tearing his hair out. If his father found out that he had forcibly taken this provincial girl and turned her into a child, a huge scandal would be inevitable. Garcia's father had already threatened to send his son to the army if he didn't get his act together, and such a turn of events would destroy what was left of their relationship of trust. If his father lost his reputation in society, his son would automatically lose all the privileges and inheritance money that Orbelin had promised to leave him. And Diego was well aware that without his parents' money, he was nothing. Then the rich scoundrel suddenly realized that Mirabel's son would soon be known by everyone. There was no way to hide her belly, and the longer it went on, the more they would ask the girl what and from whom. She would give him away in no time. No, it would have to be done gently but radically. Diego decided that he would not let some random servant ruin his beautiful life, and for that, he would have to do anything to preserve his reputation and that of his family. Diego saw that the only way out of this situation was to remove Mirabel from the path of his life forever. Garcia Jr. decided that he had to act quickly before Mirabel's flat stomach was completely lost. Pondering the best way to eliminate the girl, the rich man was lost in doubt. It would be possible to arrange an accident, for example, that she would accidentally fall down the stairs, but this still did not guarantee a 100% result. The girl might survive, and she could have an abortion. And then the truth would come out. As for the more brutal methods involving weapons, the boy also had his own specificities. The fact is that since childhood, Diego had a slight fear of blood. If someone managed to kill a fly, the heir to the bread empire had to spend several days in a private room in an elite hospital to recover from the shock. In the end, the rich young man decided to take a different path. After finding out what time Mirabel usually eats dinner at the end of the day, Garcia Jr. slipped a large dose of sleeping pills into her tea glass. After waiting for the girl to collapse unconscious on the ground, the villain brazenly stuffed her into the trunk of his sports car and drove her out of the country compound. Late fall was famous in those parts for its frosty nights. Although it wasn't that dark yet, there was a particular nighttime chill in the air that was unique to November. When he reached the wide bridge over the river, Diego paused for a moment. The gravity of what he was doing weighed on the rich man, but there was nothing he could do about it, unfortunately. Mirabel had to keep quiet forever and take to the grave the tangible proof of the crime he had committed against her. If she doesn't do it now, she will never decide. And that threatened her family with total ruin. Forgive me, nymph. Trust me, it's better for everyone. Garcia Jr. turned to the breathless girl and, pulling her emotionless body out of the hold, quickly threw her over the bridge railing. The body fell into the cold, black water with a loud splash. The current was strong enough that if she didn't wake up immediately, she would be dragged far beneath the ice. Once his dark work was done, Diego climbed back into the car and drove off, letting the quiet of the night bear witness to another of his crimes. The boy was quite sure that no one had seen him. However, contrary to the rich bastard's expectations, he was not the only living soul in that place. Mateo, an old hermit fisherman, was fishing at that moment. Drifting in a thicket of reeds in his old boat, seeing the young man throwing the girl from the bridge in cold blood, the fisherman, without losing a minute, threw in the bait he had prepared for the night and began to row rapidly in the hope of reaching the place where the victim had fallen faster than the treacherous current could reach her. He grabbed the woman by the collar of her light uniform. Mateo miraculously managed to pull the girl out of the water. Searching for the barely audible chain of a pulse around her neck, the old man exhaled in relief. Hooray! But what was he going to do with this unusual find? The first thing Mateo did was take off his coat and wrap the almost frozen girl in it. He had no identification, or at least no business card to find out where the unfortunate girl might be working. Only one thing was clear. The girl urgently needed help, and the fisherman knew the place where he could take her without fear. For many years, Matteo had lived as a hermit. Alone in a small hut on the riverbank, his livelihood was mainly fishing. But sometimes, especially in summer, he managed to catch wild ducks in his traps. He donated all his food to the old convent, not far from where Matteo had taken Mirabelle. The old man donated fish and game there in exchange for receiving large rations of various foods from the convent kitchen. So he had been cooperating in God's place for 30 years, and it was a very profitable cooperation. It was already late when the fishermen finally reached the huge fortress of Piedragri. The old man did not hesitate to knock on the monastery door with a huge cast-iron ring. At first, no one opened the door, but a dim light flickered on in one of the windows. Within minutes, Matteo had unemotionally handed the drowned woman over to the care of the local abbess, Mother Febronia, and a dozen young nuns who had rushed to the aid of their mentor at such a late hour. "Be careful with her," Matteo admonished the nuns. "After all, the girl has plunged into the icy water. She must have frozen. Don't worry, Matteo. If it is God's will, your mermaid will be all right." Mother Febronia smiled discreetly. Mirabelle received all the necessary care and was left to warm herself by the warm stove. Hypothermia had caused the girl to go into nervous shock. This and a massive dose of sleeping pills contributed to the immediate miscarriage. When one of the nuns saw red spots on the girl's bedspread, she knew immediately. With the mother's permission, she called an ambulance. The doctors were stunned by the circumstances of Mirabelle's appearance in the convent, but did not go into details. Her job was to save the patient, and the rest was not so important, especially since Mother Febronia had promised to take the girl as soon as she could walk. At the same time, the doctors were still obliged to inform the relatives of what had happened, so they waited for her to regain consciousness. However, Febronia felt that she had to be by her newly rescued daughter's side, no matter what happened. When she came across the possession of the monastery entrusted to her by the Lord, the prioress realized that it was the sign she had been waiting for several years. The fact is that in recent years the woman had begun to doubt the correctness of her chosen path, and the girl found in the river seemed to bring her back to the path of faith. When Mirabelle came to everyone's surprise, it turned out that she remembered absolutely nothing about herself, nor how she had ended up in the river in late autumn. The poor girl thought that she might want to commit suicide because of an unplanned baby. The doctors had told her about it, so she happily agreed to stay in the convent with the prioress and the other sisters for a while. In this way, Mirabelle hoped to purify her soul from the terrible sin she had almost committed. By the grace of fate, the former maiden began to live in the convent on equal terms with the ordinary nuns. Every morning the girl prayed, swept the yard, took part in preparing meals, and prayed again for the salvation of her soul and that of her own unborn child. She felt that she was missing an important detail of reality that would allow her to finally remember everything. But until that detail was found, Mirabelle continued to devote her days to simple work and prayer. She never dared to take real monastic vows. The girl wore a cassock. Her hair was always covered with a scarf and she wore no makeup on her face. But Mirabelle calmly fulfilled all the usual duties of a nun. For this reason, the local sisters considered her a kind of servant who could leave her monastery at any time when she herself was ready and wanted to return to secular life. A year passed in this way. One day, Mirabelle was asked to pick up a donation box at a charity center. The money was to be used to build the abandoned part of the convent where there were rooms for women who had gone through difficult times with their children. This wing had suffered a sudden collapse of dilapidated structures, so its repair had long been Mother Febronia's innermost dream. Picking up the heavy wooden box, Mirabelle happened to notice a glossy secular magazine lying on the reception desk. The picture on the cover looked vaguely familiar to the nun. She flipped through the glossy magazine until she reached the correct page and began to look at the specified photographs which showed a romantic couple who were about to get married, and on this occasion, they were inviting everyone to their huge country house that looked like a fairy tale castle. The event promised the guests the performance of the brightest stars and a real royal feast. So, those who wished to join the festivities were free to go to the Garcia mansion at a date and time to be announced later. Garcia the nun whispered mechanically, looking at the handsome but implacable face of the young groom. The bride, who was next to him, looked exactly like one of those beauty bloggers that her best friend Letizia was so fond of reading in the past. Garcia Garcia, Diego Garcia, Letizia, Luisa. The pain split Mirabel's brain in two like a sharp blade, causing the world around her to go completely dark for a moment. In a fraction of a second, the girl's memory unloaded from her insides all the memories associated with the life of a nun before the convent. Mirabel remembered her adored parents, everything that had happened in the cursed mansion of the business couples, and her best friends who had probably buried her long ago. The girl tore the magazine in half with such force that the thin pages seemed to squeal pitifully under the pressure of her fragile-looking but strong fingers. Fortunately, no one was around at the moment. Otherwise, the young sister in the cassock would have had a lot of awkward questions. The richly decorated courtyard of the Garcia mansion was bustling with elegant dance music. The guests who had come to the party did not stop congratulating the young bride and groom. Waiters and local servants were everywhere, providing a constant flow of alcohol and refreshments for all the guests. Diego wanted to show that the generosity of his house extended to all social strata, so he ordered that everyone could attend the celebration. His fiancée was the daughter of a very important official with whom Garcia Padre maintained a close friendship and with whom he had been doing profitable business for many years. The girl was, of course, a perfect beauty, but she did not need the groom's feelings. Both understood that this marriage was a bargain for both parties, and therefore they simply had to be understanding with each other. Mirabel entered the party almost unnoticed. The long hooded robe completely concealed her face, so the former maiden did not have to worry about anyone recognizing her. When the famous guests began to toast the health of the young couple, Mirabel got as close to them as possible and, taking advantage of a moment, skillfully jumped onto the wooden platform. There was an ominous silence around. Mirabel took the precious, expensive microphone with the initials of the owners of the house in her hand and brought it to her lips and abruptly threw back her black hood. In an instant, Diego's face lost all trace of color. It seemed that all the blood in his veins had suddenly dried up, leaving only prickly dust. The bewildered bride did not understand what a nun in a cassock with a huge cross hanging from a golden chain like a fateful banner of justice was doing here. Mirabel, staring at the rich man who had tried to kill her and her unborn child just a year ago, spoke slowly into the microphone. "I just want to say one thing to the bride now. Please remember that there is a child rapist and murderer and she could be next at any moment." At that very moment, the guards took Mirabel by the arms and led the completely unresisting girl to the other end of the park. As she left, the nun cast a scornful glance at the groom. Afterwards, she felt her whole life crumbling like a sandcastle under the force of the waves. The party, understandably, ended there. After numerous and very humiliating procedures for the Garcia family, the career of the Bread King came to an irrevocable end. Orbelin failed to get elected to Parliament. The father of the failed bride and the compromising influence of his own son had done their work. The family business also suffered huge losses and was eventually liquidated by the government. The bride's parents belonged to very high political circles, so the ambition to wipe out the Garcia family had become almost the main goal of the year for these people. In the end, they succeeded. Diego, always covered by the cloak of disgrace in his family, became a persona non grata in secular society. The father was barely able to negotiate with the police so as not to send his son to prison for a long time. Instead, Orbelin personally admitted Diego to a closed, personalized clinic where his beloved son was to undergo a long course of psychotherapy and treatment for various addictions. Upon learning what Mirabel had been through and how she was nearly killed at the hands of her potential son-in-law, the bride's father, the same politician, forced the Garcia family to pay the girl a huge financial compensation. If they refuse, the press will immediately receive an interview in which all the previous victims of abuse suffered at the hands of the vicious son are mentioned in black and white. Ofelia, Diego's mother, burning with shame, immediately wrote a check to Mirabel that she could easily cash at any bank. The woman wanted to do everything she could to make up for the boy's terrible guilt. Mirabel herself, having come a long way from a naive provincial girl to a maid and a nun who had lost her memory but had found full faith in God in her heart, left the convent to continue her own path. The Matuska Fabronia did not hold her back or persuade her to stay. Although the woman's heart had long been attached to the unusual girl, the abbess respected the lives of others too much to allow herself to interfere with God's plan and condemn people to exist in a place that was not intended for them in the first place. With Garcia's money, Mirabel first set about restoring the badly damaged wing of the convent. Now all the women who had somehow suffered from the criminal acts of men could go there again. With the remaining money, she opened a small beauty salon where she immediately invited her best friends to work. It turns out that Letizia and Luisa had been trying to find Mirabel for a long time after she suddenly disappeared from Garcia's house. But then, they lost all hope. They were overjoyed to learn that their beloved Mirabel was alive and happily agreed to become not only employees of the salon, but also business partners of the former servant nun, who now promises to accompany her everywhere and not let her go anywhere alone, which, of course, was a nice, friendly joke. The girl's business, although still small, has started to generate steady income. The three of them joke that they will soon be real entrepreneurs like their parents dreamed of. Mirabel is doing well at the moment and has met a great guy, Tristan, who works as a volunteer at the city shelter for the poor, and the girl tries to go there as often as possible to help the needy together with him. She is totally happy with Tristan and can finally forget those terrible days in the house of the rich bread merchants. The young people have recently started living together, and the girl has even managed to move her beloved parents out of the village. She has bought them a separate flat and actively takes care of them. Tristan doesn't mind as he grew up in an orphanage, and in Mirabel's parents he has finally found the long-awaited family. If you liked the story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel.